Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're diving straight into a truly defining moment in modern history, the 2025 India-Pakistan standoff, which you probably know better as Operation Sindoor. Now, to make sure we're getting the absolute most accurate, rigorous, and completely impartial look at this event, today's explainer is built directly from the top international journals, academic reports, and security analyses out there. We're drawing our insights heavily from sources like the Electronic Journal of Social and Strategic Studies, the International Journal for Multidisciplinary Research, and the Journal of Contemporary Politics, just to name a few. We're going to structure today's explainer around a ripple effect. So we'll start with the 96-hour operation, then move to shifting strategic doctrines, global diplomatic realignment, the war of narratives, and finally wrap up with India's major power status. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the 96-hour operation, ground zero of the 2025 conflict. According to a really detailed chronological analysis by the Electronic Journal of Social and Strategic Studies, the catalyst for all of this occurred on April 22, 2025. There was a deadly terror attack in Pahalgam carried out by the Resistance Front, which tragically resulted in the deaths of 26 civilians. In response to this, on May 7th, India launched Operation Sindoor, which was a series of precision strikes targeting militant camps across the border. Pakistan immediately answered with Operation Bunyanan Marksus, targeting Indian installations. This intense tit-for-tat escalation played out for about 4 days, right up until a ceasefire was sought by Pakistan's Director General of Military Operations on May 10th. Now, take a look at this massive number, 114. According to a super comprehensive study in the Hermes Calamos journal, this conflict involved over 114 aircraft. We're literally talking about 72 from the Indian Air Force and over 40 from the Pakistani Air Force. The journal actually notes that this made it the largest beyond visual range air combat engagement in modern military history. And the wildest part? It all happened without any terrestrial border crossings whatsoever. What's really fascinating here in this excerpt from the International Journal for Multidisciplinary Research is how it highlights India's heavy utilization of indigenous technology. They used systems like the Akash surface-to-air missile and the BrahMos supersonic missile, which were absolutely critical for executing these precision strikes. It really shows us why technological self-reliance is basically a non-negotiable asset in modern defense. But as the report details, it wasn't just about physical, kinetic force. India was simultaneously navigating the information domain, launching digital initiatives to rapidly counter disinformation and keep control of the narrative. Moving on to our second ripple, shifting strategic doctrines. We're rethinking nuclear deterrence here. To really grasp the significance of this, we have to talk about the stability-instability paradox. It's a pretty dense military theory, but let's simplify it. Imagine two people standing in a room completely filled with gasoline. Mutually assured destruction means neither of them is going to light a match, right? That's the stability part. But because they both know neither will light a match, they might actually feel emboldened to throw targeted darts at each other. That's the instability, or the lower-level proxy warfare. Well, analysis from sources like the Friday Times suggests that Operation Sindoor completely upended this old assumption. It proved that a nation could throw a high-intensity conventional dart without inevitably lighting that nuclear match. The crucial takeaway here is captured perfectly by the Electronic Journal of Social and Strategic Studies. They wrote, Operation Sindoor demonstrated how political and strategic means can be achieved through limited and tier-based escalation without crossing the nuclear red lines. Essentially, the established patterns of proxy warfare and strategic restraint, this idea that you just couldn't retaliate conventionally without sparking a nuclear war, were totally disrupted. This fundamentally changes the math for how nuclear-armed nations might engage from here on out. Let's look at Section 3. Global diplomatic realignment. How did the world actually react? The academic sources, particularly the IJFMR, detail a really complex mix of global reactions. You had the United States taking a pretty restrained approach, focusing heavily on mediation. China also urged restraint, but they maintained a posture that was protective of their ally Pakistan and, of course, their regional economic interests with CPEC. On the flip side, Russia was highly supportive of India, and Russian-supplied tech like the S-400 played a pivotal role. The European Union offered unified support, firmly aligning with India's right to self-defense against terror. Crucially, the sources make sure to note that India completely rejected third-party mediation, insisting they would handle a crisis strictly bilaterally. These academic excerpts from the IJFMR really emphasize this deepening defense cooperation with Russia, who honestly emerged as India's most reliable strategic partner during the crisis. It also highlights the EU's unequivocal, unified support for India. And, this wasn't just a brief temporary alignment. These documents actually point to long-term strategic roadmaps being built directly from this very event.
This brings us to Section 4, the War of Narratives, the Invisible Battlefield.
Drawing from some really interesting media analysis in the Journal of Contemporary Politics and a great brief from Asian Confluence, we see a stark contrast in competing frames. On one side, India stated its goal was strictly counterterrorism, framing it as a precise, measured act of self-defense, aiming for minimal collateral damage. But on the other side, international media often adopted what the academics actually term aggressor-victim framing. They frequently portrayed the events as an unprovoked escalation, constantly hyphenating India and Pakistan as equals in the conflict. And this wasn't just some casual observation. A thematic analysis of 16 prominent international media articles by the Journal of Contemporary Politics found that global media consistently flattened the deep asymmetries between the two nations. They frequently downplayed, or in some cases completely decontextualized, that initial April terror attack that sparked the entire crisis in the first place. Which brings us to a seriously thought-provoking quote from the Asian Confluence brief. It reads, "The crisis is emblematic of the deep ideological and narrative fissures that increasingly define South Asian geopolitics." The brief argues that the media coverage relied heavily on an Orientalist lens. It really highlights this ongoing, fierce battle over who controls the grammar of legitimacy on the world stage, meaning who actually has the power to dictate what is recognized as an act of terror versus what is accepted as legitimate defense. All right, zooming out to our final ripple, Section 5, India's major power status, the new global ranking. Check out this ranking, third. According to the Asia Power Index 2025 report, which was covered by India Today Global, for the first time ever, India officially entered the League of Major Powers, ranking third globally, right after the United States and China. And according to the Lowy Institute, it was Operation Sindoor that acted as the critical catalyst, pushing India across this historic threshold. But how exactly does a country cross that kind of threshold? Well, this breakdown of the 4 pillars of major power status makes it pretty clear. While the sheer military capability demonstrated during Operation Sindoor dramatically shifted global perceptions, it was actually the combination of that military strength with massive inward economic investment, expanding diplomatic outreach, and growing cultural influence that officially cemented this new status. It's the whole package. Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought. We have just seen how a 96-hour military operation can completely reshape global diplomacy and elevate a nation's power ranking. But as modern warfare moves increasingly beyond the physical battlefield and deep into the cognitive domain, who will ultimately control the narratives of future global conflicts? It is a fascinating question, and I highly encourage you to dive into the source journals we discussed today to explore it further. Thank you so much for learning with me on today's Explainer, and I'll see you next time.